Perfect. Okay, so the paper I will be presenting today is called Centering Autistic Perspectives, Social Acceptability of Goals, Learning Context, and Procedure for Young Autistic Children. So I'm really proud that this paper was written by people that I know. And Tanzi, I am very happy to report that one of the authors were Dr. Rajaraman, my favorite. So, so continuation from last week. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to have an opening discussion. So first of all, what do you think as socially valid goals, learning environment, antecedent intervention, consequential intervention, and the perspective of shareholders? Just pick one of each of these points. What do you think are one socially valid goal, one learning environment, one antecedent intervention, one consequential intervention, and whose perspective of all the shareholders that we are currently serving, matters the most, should be counted the most? Okay, anybody?
The last one, I think, perspective of shareholders is the social validity is what people think,
Right.
how effective, right?
Mm-hmm. My question is for each of these, choose one example. Like for example, goals. Whatever goal that you have in your program for your clients are most socially valid.
Transition to school.
Mm-hmm.
Transition to school. Reduction of behaviors at home, of aggressive behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Daily living skills.
Okay.
Functional communication.
Bonus points for you because you answered 3 and asked for 1.
Maybe the whole caboodle right there.
Bonus points. You get brownie points from me. Learning environment. What do you think? Sandy, just one. What type of learning environment would be considered most socially valid?
One of them would be home.
Yeah.
The home environment.
Okay. Antecedent intervention?
Is it still me, or are you tossing it out to the others?
I was anybody.
Oh, okay.
Everybody.
I'll be quiet and leave opportunities for others to to answer.
Do you mean like giving selections or those kind of things? Do you mean that?
Like, of all the antecedent interventions that you have done, what are some or one that you think would be most acceptable?
Giving choices.
Sorry?
Giving choices.
Huh?
Giving choices.
Oh, choices. Yeah, good one. Eileen, do you have some ideas on any of these points?
I'm not actually working in a clinic, so I don't really know.
You don't work in a clinic?
No.
Oh, okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background so I know when to?
Oh. I studied for RBT.
Oh, you're currently learning. Okay, you're training to be an RBT.
Although I already got the certificate.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, and I was interested in this area, and I've been taking some short lessons, like lectures.
Mm.
And then I I was given the opportunity to sit in the discussion. So I just wanted to see what you guys talk about.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Consequential intervention.
Praise.
Praise. Yeah, for sure.
Praise in a specific way.
Positive
Yeah.
descriptive praise. My favorite.
And
Okay.
it doesn't only mean just positive descriptive. It means in a way the that child likes. Not just
Most
always saying,
specific
"Yeah,
way.
you did it." Like in a way, in a specific way that
Specific
client
way
likes. Yeah.
in delivering praise delivery. Specific praise delivery. Yeah, like a tap, like a gentle tap, or like a clap.
Yeah,
or
the way the
cheer.
client likes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. How about perspective of shareholders? Whose perspective would be important to consider?
Parents?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, especially for young autistic children, right? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so 4 groups of shareholders to consider when we are evaluating social validity. So I'm going into the background. Is the direct consumer, which is the young kiddo, and then also the indirect consumers. For young and members of the extended community, which is 2 and 4, and number 3 would be members of the immediate community. So, in this paper, they were saying that especially for young kids with autism, the priority is usually on number 4. The priority is usually on number 2. However, oftentimes or sometimes the indirect consumers, which is the parents and family. Unfortunately, oftentimes the parents or the family, they do not have ASD themselves, and so it's also really important to consider the perspective of the members of the extended community. Especially nowadays that we are experiencing pushback from the autistic community in goals such as reducing non-dangerous stereotypy, extinction procedures, as well as goals that are masking autistic traits. So I am going to go back a little bit. So the direct consumers are those who receive the intervention, like our clients. And like you said, clients need to be given a choice to determine the acceptable intervention, even for young children. Because caregivers are more likely to implement the intervention that children likes, right? And also, when we are considering the perspective of direct consumers, we are also improving their general well-being. And then for the indirect consumers, those who are directly involved in and impacted, but not direct recipients, such, for example, the caregiver, sibling, teachers, those are and teachers. So it's really important because they are the ones who implement the developed intervention, and they are more likely to adopt feasible, useful, aligned, if those goals are aligned with personal values. They also make educational decision making on behalf of the young children. And then there's also perspective of members of the immediate community, those who are engaged with direct and indirect consumers, but not directly connected to the intervention use. For example, the bus drivers, the relatives, church members, and it's important to consider their perspective as well because it impacts the use of intervention, or they will be impacted by the outcome. For example, school administrators, they are, like the school leaders, they provide resources and support for these children in school, and bus drivers cannot safely drive when there is challenging behavior in a bus. And then lastly, there is the members of the extended community. They are not regularly interacting with our consumer or our client directly, but they have meaningful connections. For example, the neighbors, they have the same race and same diagnosis. And they provide additional insights into the direct consumer, especially if they have communication challenges. You know, like if our young kids, they have communication challenges, then we can consider the perspective of say autistic community members in considering how probably they will feel when they are given that type of intervention. Okay, so going to the next slide. So the purpose. So the research question. So the purpose. Okay, so the purpose of this paper is to give recommendation for autistic affirming intervention for practitioners. Okay, so the research questions are two in this paper. The first one is what goals, learning context, and behavior intervention procedures do autistic adults prioritize and deprioritize for young autistic children, and how these perspectives compare to those of caregivers and practitioners. Number two, which shareholder perspective do autistic adults consider to be most and least important in making decisions about goals, learning contexts, and procedures implemented with young autistic children? And how do these perspectives compare to those of caregivers and practitioners? Okay, so a little bit of a background why I chose to have this paper, aside from being really inspired by Kanti's presentation last month. It's because I think there's a lot of, you know, like what we discussed earlier. There's a lot of pushback against ABA practices, especially in the Western developed world. And oftentimes, I think the perspective of young autistic learners are disregarded in the name of tough love, I feel. I think a lot of parents and maybe even practitioners used to think that, you know, it's okay for us to really force our intervention on them because they will thank us later. It's going to be really good for them in the long run. However, a lot of pushbacks from the autistic community these days, I feel, said otherwise. You know, they are not thankful that these things are done on them when they were little. And a lot of kids, especially with profound autism, that is those with autism who after the age of 8 has less than 50 in their IQ, and they have very significant communication challenges, and they require 24-hour support. These children, even when we are really hard on them, they're not learning as much as we wanted them to be. And what we have, what resulted from that, from those treatments were PTSD. And which I think inspired the works of Greg Hanley and Dr. Rajaraman that you talked about last time, Kanti. And so I think it's really important for us to really consider what do these autistic adults think of, you know, these various interventions that are, you know, some done on them. Okay. So all right, so the method, there are 660 participants. They are all above 18 years of age. They are self-identified at least in one of the shareholders categories. 34% of the participants were autistic adults. There is a typo. Oh my God. There you go. 34% of them are autistic adults, either They are medically diagnosed, they're educationally diagnosed, or they are self-diagnosing. 25.5% are caregivers of young autistic children, their parents and legal guardians. 54.4% are early childhood special education professionals who are working with autistic children. 11.6% are shared. They share two shareholder groups, like autistic caregivers of young autistic children, and 1.4% shared three shareholder groups. Okay. Okay. So the method of the survey is that they have sort of like a Google form, but they are used at Vanderbilt University and most U.S. university for medical type research. So the form will look really similar to Google form, but it's called Red Tap. And the topics are designing the learning context, developing educational goals, selecting intervention procedures to reduce challenging behavior. And number 3 is divided into 2. What are antecedent procedures that are socially valid, and then what are the consequential procedures that are socially valid? And number 4, whose perspective matters most? And it has a 1 to 6 point Likert scale. Number 1 would be very high priority. Number 2, somewhat high priority. 3, medium priority. 4, somewhat low priority. 5, very low priority. And number 6, should never teach. Okay. All right, so we get to the results section. The first one is goal. The goal. Okay. I am going to talk about the discussion. I'm going to talk about the summary first, and then we'll read through the results one by one. Okay. So in general, they found out very high social validity on communication and autonomy, like Gian said, providing choice, especially for challenging behavior. In general, they found very low goals that are promoting masking. For example, tolerating loud sounds, staying seated, increasing eye contact, and times and space, teaching time and places to do stereotypy. Higher also in the goal, in contrast to tolerating loud sounds, they favor using sunglasses, headphones, as well as alternative seating, prioritizing sensory needs over looking different. Okay, so I'm going to zoom on the goals, on the graphs, and talk about how the graph is organized. Okay. So you see the letterings here, ACP. A is the median rating for autistic adults. C is the median rating for caregivers, and P is the median rating of practitioners. Data to the right of the y-axis indicate higher acceptability ratings, whereas data to the left of the y-axis indicate lower acceptability ratings. Okay, and so the white would be should never teach. This is the Likert scale. The white should never teach, and then the very light gray would be very low priority, and then the darker gray, somewhat low priority, followed by medium priority, somewhat high priority, and very high priority. Okay, so for goals, the highest one is decreasing self-injurious behavior such as headbanging, self-biting, followed by refusing, non-preferred things, saying stop or no, followed by self-help skills. I think one of us mentioned that, daily living skills, right? And then communicating using multiple modalities. And this is in contrast of prioritizing speech. And then followed by decreasing aggression. I'm actually pretty shocked that decreasing aggression is all the way at number 5. Yeah, hitting, kicking, biting. And then followed by communicating with device for children who use minimal verbal language. And then there is identifying emotion, navigating routines, eating foods that meet minimum nutritional needs, social problem solving, transitioning between activities, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, pre-academic skills, cooperating or collaborating with adults, social conversation, following adult direction, sharing toys and materials with others, participating in group activities, communicating verbally. So like I said, communicating verbally is quite at the very bottom and a priority for goals. And then having manners, staying within designated areas, such as staying in circle time, carpet during circle time, eating new and or different foods, tolerating loud sounds, staying seated, learning certain times and places to engage and not engage the stereotypy, increasing eye contact and decreasing stereotypy overall. So to recap, the very bottom of the rankings are those that, goals that are that could be categorized as masking, pretend like, they wanted to present as looking neurotypical, whereas goals that are higher on the social validity scale, according to autistic adults, are, those that are that are promoting communication and autonomy, especially for challenging behavior. Thoughts on this? I'd love to hear what you all say about this. There are 5 more graphs, but I think it'll be fun to discuss a little bit every time we looked at a new finding.
I think it's surprising of like how the individuals with autism is rating what the priority should be. So like you said, the self-injurious behaviors, it's quite surprising that they actually rated that highest. I guess it makes sense because like they're injuring themselves, right? Because it's something that is dangerous, and it's good that the individuals realize that, and it does make sense that they've rated that the highest, and it is important. But I think like with all the with the graphs that you shared and the finding, I think it's really good for us as behavior analysts to take into perspective again, like when we design our programs, or especially like, with short limited amount of time, not enough funding, we have to prioritize what's most important, right? So I think like this rating done kind of helps us to take into perspective when we design, like when we talk to parents, okay, this is probably of course we need to take in their input as well, but I think like when sometimes parents are lost also, but it's good, like this is something that we can kind of bring out to the parents, you know what I mean? Like it's a very good source of information, Felicia.
Yeah, I mean, especially I have a lot of pushback from parents, especially parents who are not non-autistic, when I'm trying to prioritize communicating with it, using multiple modalities and communicating with device, because they really want their kids to be communicating verbally, which is all the way down here. I think showing this graph will, maybe open a discussion that, hey, maybe your child will thank you if you really just force vocal communication over multiple modalities. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good one. Yeah.
Anybody else? Gian or Eileen?
I was surprised about the identifying emotions. I didn't realize that autistic population was also interested in identifying emotions that much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I don't it's about third, fourth, fifth, seventh. It's the seventh one that's on the list. So it's quite surprising. And and actually I have one question. Where did this list come from? Like there's other skills also, right? So where did they find these skills to rate?
I don't know. That's such a good question. I can ask them.
Oh yeah.
Ask them.
It's not on the journal
Uh,
where they got the
if
list.
they are, I think I might have skipped it. I don't remember reading through it. I can send you the paper to have read more carefully. But that's such a good question. Wait, such a good-
And then I got also curious about what would the profound autism people rank these skills also, because I assume that these people are perfectly able to say
Yeah,
out loud what
Yeah.
they want, but what
Yeah.
about the profound
Yeah.
autism
that's such a good
population?
question, and I think they listed that under the limitation, right?
Wow.
Because it requires people who can read, they can navigate through these surveys, right? They have some sort of technological knowledge to be able to move through a 35-minute, I think if I'm not mistaken, about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minute survey to complete, right? And so with that, we are alienating some people also who are who cannot perform these, right? And I think also one really important limitation is that they did not collect data on social economic status, race, as well as education, which is really huge. So I know all of these people who wrote this paper, and I know that it's out of Vanderbilt University, and it's smack in the middle of America, with mostly white people and upper class, right? And so these are their perspective, and so if we want to apply it to our perspective here in wherever we are. These geographical locations probably better, but then for us, we probably need to put a little bit more logical spin behind it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to continue.
Maybe you can propose they did a survey, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they could extend it here.
They can what?
They can extend it outside of America.
Yeah.
Since
It's really hard. I mean, I've done research with Vanderbilt University, and the IRB is a pain in the butt. It's really, really hard. I tried to do my research project on what do you call it, the refugee community, and it was so freaking hard. I mean, it's good that they're trying to really protect these vulnerable population, right? But then because of that, to do research with them, you have to jump through so many hoops. And I tried my very best. And even when I was so determined, I wanted to try so hard to include them in my research, and I was not successful. And so I think, and also a lot of people in research, they this is how they think, right? Publish or perish. They would just want to crank out and publish as many papers as possible. And so having to jump through all these hoops and everything, that's probably definitely need to be worked on. But it's just not as easy to find these participants who are not from upper middle class educated environment. Yeah. Okay, so second one. All right. Second one is learning context. This is the one that shocked me the most. All right. So overall, you know what? Let's read through them. Okay. All right. Okay. Portion of the day spent in settings with peers versus one-on-one setting. Highest one is most days spent with peers, but smaller part of the day spent one-on-one. Followed by day evenly split between one-on-one and with peers. Most of the day spent on one-on-one, smaller part of the day spent with peers, followed by entire day spent with peers, and the last one, entire day spent one-on-one. Proportion of days spent in inclusive versus self-contained setting. Most of the highest one, the highest ranked one was most of the days spent in inclusive setting, part of the day spent in self-contained setting, followed by day evenly split between self-contained and inclusive setting, entire day spent in inclusive setting, followed by most of day spent in self-contained setting, part of day spent in inclusive settings, and entire day spent in self-contained setting. And then the next category is proportion of days spent in child-led versus adult-led learning. Most days spent in child-led learning, part of the day spent in adult-led learning is the highest one. And then days split evenly between adult-led and child-led learning, followed by entire day spent in child-led learning, followed by most of the day spent in adult-led learning, part of the day spent in child-led learning, and lastly, entire day spent in adult-led learning. Number of weekly hours spent in ideal learning context would be 11 to 20 hours, which I thought was quite a lot. Followed by 6 to 10 hours, followed by 20 to 30, and then 1 to 5, 30 to 40, and 0 hours, and then lastly, more than 41 hours. And then in the discussion section, they talked about appropriate learning environments are highly context dependent, varying with the needs and preferences of the child, and that all learning environment at some contexts are acceptable. And it is unacceptable to do very, very long hours or too short hours in ideal learning environments even. And then entire day in adult-led learning was unacceptable. And this is the shocking part because they also have the qualitative section of the survey, and they talk about that in the discussion as well. And so the autistic adults and other participants were able to write, paragraphs about what they think about the ideal learning context. And this part shocked me. So autistic adults rated self-contained or one-on-one contacts as more acceptable than practitioners, because one-on-one contacts and self-contained contacts are not as overwhelming and overstimulating. So because in America, we believe, like in special education, we believe, and parents have fought for this concept of least restrictive environment, which means that we or school cannot pull a child out of general ed classroom unless they have sufficient proof that even with accommodation, the children still cannot access the curriculum. And parents fought so hard to have this passed into law, least restrictive environment. And yet, autistic adults rated self-contained and one-on-one contacts as more acceptable than the practitioner. In the discussion, they talked about how we need future research in understanding what least restrictive environment means from multiple perspective, not just from parents' perspective. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit. So what do you all think?
I got mixed feelings.
We want to hear it.
You want to hear it? Um, well, like it makes sense that, you know, like you said, that they would prefer like the one-on-one setting, right? Um, and then how parents are fighting for the least intrusive,
Least restrictive environment.
sorry, least restrictive. Um, it's sort of like, I don't know, like there's validity in both of them, you know, because who do we say who's like, if we like say one-on-one and one-on-one environment is the most where they feel safe because there's less distraction, it's more controlled, but it's not reflective of the real world, right? And then so where are these individuals going? Do they realize that they have, you know, like they can't always be sheltered by parents, by teachers? And do they realize that they, at some point, that they do need to contribute, like they do need to step into the community and join the community, you know? So it's like, yeah, the parents have a point, you know, but they have a point also. So where's that balance? Maybe half and half,
Yeah.
right?
And I think they also answer that in the
Yeah, right.
survey, right? Most of the day spent in inclusive setting, but part of the day spent in self-contained setting.
So they have a breather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, especially for me, I'm really a proponent of inclusive, right? Inclusive setting, especially for my school. But after reading this, it was really humbling, I feel, because here I am. I thought I am really I'm really fighting for these kids, and yet I'm missing that really important perspective. Yeah. What the rest of you, Eileen? I'm gonna turn on my light.
Any thoughts? Eileen, do you have any thoughts? No?
It's really interesting because I have a young adult. He's I think 20 years old, 21. And he wants his space. But that's isolating, you know, himself from accessing different things. So out in the community, we work on the integration for the individual to be integrated with other peers. But we also like when he gives signs like, hey, I need my space, this is too much, we allow that space. So like, again, back to like, I think everything is a balance.
Yeah.
Like in these, like all these three categories. I think there should be a balance between both, because there's a benefit in inclusion, there's a benefit in one-on-one, there's a benefit in yeah, right. You know, free time, like child-led and adult-led, you know. I think that, yeah, I mean, I find like I think just a good balance, because they get the best of both worlds. Like child-led intervention is amazing, you know, it's natural environment. But sometimes with some children, to teach certain things, it's just hard to teach in the natural environment. So maybe a structured adult-led learning would be better. But with that, we like when we're in a structured setting, it doesn't mean that we stay in a structured setting forever, because those skills got to be put into practice, into functional routines, so that they become meaningful for the individual. Or if not, it's just lost, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I've got,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think they agree with you as well. I think overall that entire day spent one-on-one is bad. Entire day spent with peers is almost as bad, right? So like
I-
a good balance, most of the day spent with peers and smaller part of the day, when they are overwhelmed or they needed mass trials on things to get learning more efficient, right? Spend on one. Yep.
I want to talk more about the time that the autistic population talks about.
Oh,
They
okay.
rated
Sorry.
it's the best they got is sometimes acceptable. So it's like they don't want to get the intervention most of the time. If you see the 0 hours, parents are really against it, but the autism population is somewhat okay, somewhat a bit more okay with that.
Oh God, sorry.
So
Yeah.
from that, I'm thinking like we need to take on more responsibility as to how we are teaching our clients. Maybe because they've got not bad ABA, but the old ABA, and
Mhm.
they got the pairing that ABA is kind of the thing that will torture you. That
Mhm.
maybe those populations were the ones who grew up and gave these answers.
Mhm.
I hope since more NET is getting popular,
Mhm.
the answer will be different, maybe in the next decade. But yeah, I think we should do some more pairing, like, yeah, try to get them to experience more positive things with when we are doing the intervention. Like
I think
just some thoughts about myself and reflection on ABA.
Mhm.
I think you have a good point. This research should be replicated again,
Yeah,
couple of,
right?
maybe in 10 years, 20
Mhm.
years, right? Like a representation of the different generations
Right.
of, right? The
Yeah.
X generation, the Y generation, the Z generation. That'd be interesting. And then pull them together and see, like, compare.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is really important. And there's this one study that I read, really controversial, and probably you guys have read it as well, using ABA to change a boy's sexual orientation. It happened in the 70s or the 60s, somewhere there in UCLA.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And back then it was socially valid, but now it was retracted by Java. I think a couple years ago it was retracted by Java. And the subject of that study, well, again, we don't know if that's what caused it, but the subject of the study committed suicide like 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, gonna move on to number 3. We still have like 4 more graphs to go. All right. Okay. All right. So number 3, antecedent intervention. Let's read through it first, and then I'll talk about the discussion. So this is the procedures, antecedent intervention. All right. So using communication device is very high. And then using followed by sunglasses, teaching communication skills when the child is calm. Noise canceling headphones also pretty high. Teaching emotional regulation skills when the child is calm. Alternative sitting options such as using wiggle feet, stability ball chairs, visual schedules, fidget toys, and/or stress balls, providing choices between appropriate options. Area of classroom designed for emotional regulation, also up there, incorporating child's preferences into non-preferred activities. such as holding favorite toy, in transition, scheduling breaks into difficult or non-preferred activities, chewing and or jewelry, countdown warnings before transitions, visual countdown timers to signal time before transition to non-preferred activities, and then giving several easy task direction before giving hard task direction, behavior momentum, I think. And then visual countdown timers to signal time left in non-preferred activity, reading a story about challenging situation the child will be in later, scheduling preferred activities for after non-preferred activities are complete. First, then area of classroom designed to be away from others, having a timeout location, providing tokens for participating in non-preferred activities, and providing access for preferred items or activities after earning all tokens, providing small edible items for participating in non-preferred activities. Class-wide systems where children are rewarded for following behavior expectations. Class-wide system where children are called out for not following behavior expectations. That was the last one. Yeah. So I am not surprised. Sorry. And I will. Sorry. I think we're gonna talk straight into the consequence one because the discussion sort of talk about that together. Okay. So for the consequential procedures, the highest one is. Let's see. The highest one is teaching the child strategies for regulating their emotions, very high. Helping child ask for preferred form of attention, then giving it to them. And then you will see this is in contrast with planned ignoring. Labeling the child's emotion, reminding the child of classroom expectations, immediately soothing the child, reprimanding, followed by reprimanding, such as no hitting, providing praise or extra attention to other children who are following expectations, withholding attention while they are engaging in challenging behavior is last. Okay, so sorry, this is divided into attention maintain, tangibly maintain, escape maintain. So for tangibly maintained behavior, it's very high is the helping the child ask for the toy or activity and then giving them access to it, giving the child access to a different toy or activity, waiting until the child stops engaging in challenging behavior and then giving them access to the toy or activity, immediately giving the child access to their favorite toy or activity, putting away the favorite toy or blocking access to the activity so that it's no longer available. And the last one is for escape maintained behavior, helping the child ask for break is very high, and then allowing them to leave the activity, giving first then reminder, first finish something, then you can enjoy something, non-physically prompting child to finish the activity, such as verbal reminder or model, guiding the child back to activity if they leave, providing tokens for complete part of the activity, and then letting the child leave activity once all tokens are earned, immediately letting the child leave the non-preferred activity indefinitely, waiting until the child stops engaging in challenging behavior, then allowing them to leave the activity, physically prompting to finish the activity, keeping the child within a non-preferred contained area of others, such as blocking, leaving circle time or carpet, keeping the child with non-preferred contained area by themselves, such as closing doors in a therapy session, using restrictive seating such that the child cannot leave the activity, such as seat belts and high chair. Yeah, so let's talk for a little bit, and then we need to continue.
This is a good resource for a behavior support plan.
Sorry?
It's a good resource for a behavior support plan.
That's to share.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
It is, and you're considering the proactive strategies, and then when you're doing the like you implement the reactive strategies. These are things that could be that could be very useful. And then also like going back again to the previous slide about least, what was it, least restrictive setting?
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
even considering that into the antecedent and the consequential. I think that's, yeah. Thanks, Felicia. You made my life easier.
I thought it was a little bit, I don't know, I'm a little bit bumped about this one, providing small edible items for participating in non-preferred activities. Because some kids, they really, that's the only reinforcers. Although maybe like, we have to be more clever in the goals, that it needs to be really meaningful for them so that they don't require that small edible, so that the activity can be more preferable. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have a lot of kids that use edible reinforcers?
There's some, especially the like a couple kids with profound autism. I don't use it, well, really, really little in school, but then more at the clinic. For a kid with profound autism, and her highest reinforcer is either crunchy snacks or music, like K-pop music. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. I think I'm gonna continue. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the discussion. So they really rated very, very low. The adults rated really low. Anything that has to do with escape extinction, restraint, seclusion, attention extinction, tangible extinction, just any sort of extinction is rated really, really low. And then also putting away or blocking access to activity permanently. Yeah, I have a big question mark for this one, because sometimes we know that a reinforcer is too reinforcing and so we don't use it anymore. But I'm gonna have to rethink that, because they rated that to be very, very low. And for extinction, they rate it to be worse, those that restrain bodily autonomy, like physically prompting children to finish activity, keeping the child within non-preferred contained area, and using restrictive seating. And they rated that to be more acceptable when there is a first then reminders, non-physically prompting activity to completion, and even using token boards for activity completion. And thus, it's really important to consider the function of a child's behavior and the topography of the practitioner's intervention. So extinction, fine, but what type of extinction are we doing? Are we doing something that is restraining bodily autonomy, or are we prompting the child using a non-physically restraining topography is more acceptable? Okay, so antecedent, they gain highest social validity, are the antecedent intervention that meets a child's emotional and psychological needs and regulation. And this has to do with what you said as well, Gian, that you were surprised that they rated emotional literacy very high on the goals for young autistic children. And also, they rated preventing behavior escalation and associated stress with meeting the child's emotional and psychological needs and regulation. Okay, so they also, in the discussion, they also mentioned that they need more study to see which area of ABA intervention is traumatic and how to modify the intervention to be more autistic affirming, because we used to be really heavy on escape extinction or all types of extinction, really. But I think from our meeting last month, we now know that a lot of those causes PTSD and trauma on our kiddos. Okay, so perspective. This is fun. So I think everybody agreed that the child's perspective is very important. Again, this is why white upper middle class families, right? And then followed by the child's caregivers, and then followed by autistic adults, the child's teachers and other professionals, and then lastly, us, other professionals who engage with the child, such as SLP and BCBA. Learning context, also the child's caregiver, followed by the child's caregivers, the child's teachers, and then the switch with the autistic adult if you are contrasting with these. So it seems like they're switched. And then lastly, other professionals. And then for the procedures, also the child's perspective should be ranked higher, followed by the caregivers, followed by autistic adults, followed by teachers and other professionals who engaged with the child. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about this. So autistic adults disagree with early childhood practitioners like teachers. They both think that each of them is more important than the other one. So when you look at the survey for the for a child's teacher, that's early childhood practitioners, they consistently rank themselves more important than autistic adults in the community. And autistic adults also rank themselves more important than the child's teachers. All right. Okay, limitation. Okay, so they talk about the limitation of this study. The first one is that there is multiple overlapping perspective. Autistic caregivers and practitioners took up 12.9% of the respondents. This could be a strength as well because it provides them with a unique perspective. What is it like? Because they really understand it from like a caregiver perspective, but also a caregiver of an autistic child perspective, but they are also autistic, so they can draw on from that perspective, from that experience as well. But this leads to decrease between group differences, which means that, for example, autistic caregivers may respond more similarly to autistic adults than average caregivers, and more similar to caregivers than autistic adults. And the percentage with overlapping identities are higher than in the general population. Okay. And then also, I think I mentioned this earlier, that there are no demographic information, race, gender, education level, income, whether or not they are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people are of color, and low SES, because systematically they behave differently usually in studies. And also, okay, I want to talk a little bit about missing the demographic information. An internal peer reviewer said that, quote, the results of these survey will provide insights into goals and needs that fit best for a majority group with significant levels of privilege that make those kind of goals possible to achieve. These are often not feasible goals for BIPOC families and individuals. Masking for white autistics versus masking for BIPOC autistics is very different phenomenon, and celebrating autistic culture may not pertain to the BIPOC community due to significant differences in levels of privilege. To promote autistic culture without a deeper dive into what that means for intersection groups may lead to further therapeutic colonization of white norm. I think that was really important and really loaded. Do you have any, any of you want to say anything about that? White colonization, therapeutic colonization of white norms. You all even are familiar with this because it's really American. So sorry about that.
Does it mean that it's just dominantly white, Caucasian?
Yeah, like these are just the perspective of white people, you know, because they are really like very individual, even in the population, in the general population in white middle class America, they're very much for individuality, right? They're very much for pride in oneself, right? Just that individuality part is really big in their culture. Whereas for us, Asians, we are a lot more family oriented, and we are like, I can't remember the proper term for it, but we are like more group culture instead of their culture, you know, and so therefore it's a lot much, it's much more easier said for the white population to say, yeah, autistic pride, than it is in say like Asian cultures. That's one example of it. And then also these are perspective of rich white people, and so they are born with a set of privileges that they don't have to. So even if they don't do a lot of masking, they're still going to be okay in the society. Whereas for non-white people, we already have to fit into a white mold. Okay, I'm not talking to maybe not so much Korea, sorry, GN, but maybe in America and in Australia, that if we are Asian and we are autistic and we don't mask, that's just not going to be possible for us to progress in life. Does it make sense? GN's like, I just wish this could be over as soon as possible. Okay, sorry. And then another limitation is also their limited respondents with skill set necessary to complete the survey. For example, technological literacy and not those with communication challenges are represented. So they also talk about future research should have, instead of having these into like a fill yourself survey, this could be done in a interview type of setting. And so those with profound autism, a little bit more of their voice could be heard. Okay, so recommendation for practitioners. Number one, child as the primary shareholders. It's really important to honor indicators of ascent and descent. Build on strength, follow child's interest, intentionally teach skills related to self-advocacy and autonomy. Such interventions are enhanced choice model by Rajaraman 2022. I think I talked about some enhanced choice model earlier as well in our group. And then using concurrent chains preference assessment, especially for those with limited vocal repertoire, so they can choose their own intervention. Number two, respecting autistic characteristics and culture in all aspects of the decision making, especially goals. We want to avoid masking goals such as reducing stereotypy, increasing eye contact, increasing sensory tolerance. And we want to teach peers to celebrate neurodiversity and autistic culture. Practitioners, number three, practitioners should strive to meet sensory, emotional, psychological needs when making educational choices. We need to make accommodations to prevent sensory overwhelm, such as providing headphones, fidget toys. We want to avoid goals that cause psychological stress, psychological distress, such as restraint and seclusion. It's also important to respond promptly to emotional dysregulation and distress instead of ignoring them, and teaching emotional regulation skills. And number 4, practices to incorporate. We need to consistently use high social acceptability rating goals and interventions, such as goals that promote communication and autonomy, followed by antecedent intervention. We want to avoid those with low social validity ratings, such as promoting masking of autistic characteristics, adult-led learning, very short or very long learning time, under 5 hours or more than 30 hours a week. Using extinction, such as extinction with restricted bodily autonomy, with restraint and physical prompting. And these should vary according to child's unique contexts and characteristics. Yeah, so I think we're out of time, but I thought I wanted to talk about this. But anyway, any last thought about this study?
I'm just surprised that there is this study. it's it's a wealth of information. It's good. I think it makes it as you are presenting this, it just makes me think twice about what I put on paper. And I think you made a good point also to utilize some of these rating as a friendly discussion with parents in terms of utilizing utilizing the augmentative device, because some parents really focus on the verbal, wanting their child to be verbal, or some parents. I have a parent who is certain that their child is speaking where they're not. It's unintelligible, but she is persistent that they can. And I think like this research can also maybe open up her acceptance of using augmentative devices so that her children can actually communicate their needs and to people outside of the home, at least. It's really hard. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm very surprised by the results.
Yeah. And what do you think?
For me, it was also an interesting thing to see. And also, whenever I see these flows where we talk and think more about the client's rights and what their wants and needs are, it still gets me into a struggle of what I should prioritize. Because still, here also we're talking about young children.
Mhm.
So even if we think of neurotypical children, they also have something that they don't really like, but we as parents or adults do ask them to do things because it's for their sake and it's to help them later on in their life. But should we exclude these kind of thoughts just because they are autistic, or should we think more in a like trauma kind of way just because they are autistic? I'm still struggling with that. Should we, how to deal with it? I think there should be a balance, not to just think about the they are all traumatized and we should always think about their traumatization first, versus them, they still have to live a life in the society, right? And some things have to be made, though they don't want it at first. They might not think um, communication is important, like mingling with kids is important, but they have to learn it. Not have to, but they need to learn that skill if they want to live a better life also. So do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But every single one is probably struggling with that.
Mm,
I just think so I'm a teacher, right? And I teach both kids who are typical as well as those with who are neurodivergent. And I'm really struggling with a lot of these concepts. And I think I started out as like a tiger teacher. I don't know if there's a tiger mom, there's a tiger teacher. That would be me. But then as I am learning more about education, learning more about neurodivergent perspective, I think I am softening up. I think I'm moving towards that. Like a child taking their own agency, especially for kids with autism, because there is a difference. Kids who are neurotypical and those with autism. Those who are neurotypical, they have a lot of reinforcement, in life already. Like automatically, they could say learn to speak effortlessly, for example, and because they learn to speak effortlessly, they're able to communicate how they feel. So for things that don't matter as much with their parents, the parents are probably, yeah, okay, we'll go with what you want. You want strawberry or strawberry or chocolate ice cream? Strawberry, okay, you get strawberry, no biggie, right? But I think as I am like, in my journey, I don't know, you need to ask me again in 10 years, but in my journey, I see that kids who are autistic, they have, I think, less choices that are available to them. And if we drill down really hard on them, that's when I think the trauma comes in, right? And so just the simple pleasure I feel that our typically developing kids enjoy for granted, our kids with needs cannot. And choice is just really limited, I think, for them unless they learn to communicate. And I think the struggle or the balance is there, right? Like, how do we teach them to communicate and yet honoring choice, right? And I think it's how we do that is really embedded in, again, part of that in this study. Like, what type of goal are we going to teach them? Are we going to be teaching them? Are we prioritizing, say, BB map? You need to know 50 common objects, and these 50 common objects are like objects that are, they don't really care about, versus 3 objects that they will daily encounter and choose, right? And to make that meaningful. I think we all have to. I think having that thought and that psychology in is something that we need to. It's something that we really need to keep dear in our heart and keep reflecting in our practices. We want to make sure we keep on evolving in our practice and never get stuck in one side or the other.
yeah. Oh, sorry, Tanti, I muted you because the sound was coming from both of you. Yeah.
Can I unmute? Can I talk now? So I think in one of the slides, it mentioned, I think maybe the slide before this, you mentioned like prioritizing autonomy and meeting needs. I think those two are good in a sense of looking at them as an umbrella, because there's so many skills that can fall under that. So like I know like what here with NDIS, it's yeah, we have to meet the individual's needs. It's their right. Okay. Well, you know what? How can they meet that if they don't have functional communication? You know, how can they learn how to make choices if they can't receptively identify things? So I think like these VBMAT goals, these ABLE goals, or from any other curriculum, you can put them down. It's the way that you see it. You can put them under that umbrella. So I think like it's we can be on the right track. You know, teaching autonomy and being individual. Like, how can you do that if you're not going to be um, if you can't, you know, dress yourself, right? Or maybe like if you want to be in like autonomy, it also comes with social skills, because there's no way that you can achieve something without interacting with a person, you know? So like those kind of like social skills can, those kind of things that perhaps maybe even be rated lower, if you have a sound argument to say that it is a skill that will give them access to autonomy and meeting all their needs, I think it's quite valid. Um, but also it's also thinking about like one of the things that I had a chat with a teacher from an SSP, like a special needs school. His thoughts were like, well, where's this person going to be? Like the thing is like, if we teach him this, will he actually be doing that? Where do we see? He's not. It seems like he won't be in a you know, working in the community, but most likely what will happen is that he'll end up in a day program, right? So then even looking ahead that way also gives us an idea of what goes to prioritize and what to build, in a sense of, you know, what, and going back to that needs and autonomy thing. It can help us select the goals from that.
Yeah, and also I think sometimes we kind of have to be like maybe like creative in doing that. And I think articles like this help us to nudge us towards a more creative thinking, right? For example, I guess they used to do goals that cause psychological distress, like for example, not just restraint and seclusion, but also getting used to sounds and sights that are they're very sensitive with. And what you were saying, Jian, like they need to be able to function in community, right? Like we want, like in the long run, we want, for example, say full autonomy. They need to be able to talk to someone, get someone from, to get preferred item from the store, for example. But going to the store is overwhelming for them because of all the sounds or whatever, right? And so, so I guess, you know, part of the example in this survey, instead of teaching the child to get used to these overwhelming sensations, teach them to use accommodation that can prevent so sensory overwhelm. Right, like headphones, fidget toys. I'm sure you have used them as well in your practices. But I think we can. But I think we always have to strive to get both, right? Making sure the child can learn without experiencing trauma, but then also prevent trauma by ensuring their comfort, I think, while learning. I think that should be the ideal. I mean, how we're gonna do it, I guess that's some tricky thing that we need to figure out every day.